Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to do one more Christmas cake that I know of. Who knows what this week will be like at work, but for now this will be my last cake. And we're going to do a Grinch zipper peekaboo cake. And I'm also going to show you how to make a water ganache drip and how to make those sugar spheres and how to stack them. So let's get right to it. Now first thing is I found an image online of the Grinch, and what I did was I Googled printable images of the Grinch, and I made sure that I found a site where I could pay to use the image. Now, that only takes a few dollars to do that. There are ways to do sites where you can pay to use an image, and that's what I did. So now my cake is already crumb coated, and I just crumb coated it with some leftover buttercream I had from some other projects. It doesn't matter because you're not going to see the color underneath. So I am putting some red fondant around my cake, and I'm using the panel method. And I had cut out or rolled out some red fondant, and I cut it to the height and the circumference of the cake, the length, and I put a little bit on top, and I just use shortening to attach the fondant to the buttercream. I like to use shortening because it's a little less commitment. If you need to move it, you can. But you can use water, you can use sugar syrup. There are other ways to get your fondant attached, but I prefer to use the shortening. And right here shows you a good example of why. I normally don't have too much trouble doing a wrap, but what happened, I think, is I left my fondant sitting out for too long. And when I went to lift it onto the cake, it just wanted to crack here and there. So if I had used a water or a syrup of some kind to attach the fondant to the cake, I wouldn't have been able to move it quite so easily. So what I did was I smoothed it as best as I could, and I removed the excess from the bottom. And I'm using a little bit of fondant in my hand to smooth it and remove the air bubbles. That is also a good example of why it is very smart to cut your piece that you're going to wrap with a little taller and a little longer than you need it, because you have a little bit of room, sorry, to move it around. And if you mess up a little bit, you can cut off the excess. And I just cut out the lettering. I just rolled out the fondant and used some cutters that I had. I don't normally show that part. I don't really normally show cakes that have wording on it. I don't think I ever have that I can think of. So that's how I do that. And I set it to the side to firm up. And the image I put on this piece of fondant, I like to back my images with fondant. And what that does is it keeps it from warping on the cake. It just adds a little bit of a safety net to your edible images. And that's just shortening I put on the back there because I just needed to place it on the fondant that had been set in the refrigerator and firmed up overnight. Actually, this is the next day. So that I could mark out what I need to cut out for this peekaboo zipper part. I would cut it a little bit bigger than you need it, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit, maybe 1/8 of an inch, just to give yourself a little leeway. And I'm just cutting around this section and removing it from the fondant. Now, some of that buttercream did peel off with it, and that's okay, because we have our buttercream from our crumb coat still on there. And I am just removing the rest of that buttercream just so that we have an even smooth surface to go underneath our image. Then I put a little shortening on there before I attach my image. I'm just smoothing off the edges there just a little bit. And then just kind of stick your image right in there. You do have to watch a little bit because it is wrapping over 2 different depths there of fondant in the buttercream part. Just be a little gentle that you're not ripping your image. Just have a little bit of a softer hand when you're doing this. Now, this is the zipper mold that I purchased on Amazon. I will add a link into the video description on where you can get your own. And what I like about this zipper mold, it has different ways that you can use it. This is the zipper part where your, what do you call it? The piece that you hold on to is actually in that also, in this piece. But you can see there's one section there that I use a lot on this one too, and it's just one singular side. And then there are two other molds that came with this. They have different types of zippers and different kinds of, what is that word? I know somebody can put it in the description for me or in the comments. Oh, it's a common word and it's just gone. Anyway, my point is you have some versatility with this. A lot of the molds that you find only have the closed zipper. And sometimes you need it to be open. So that's why I like this one. But there's a lot of detail in this, and you got to make sure that you're working your fondant into the details. I like to work a little bit of shortening into the fondant before I place it in the molds because it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And I like to roll it into a snake or a log, a smaller one, before I place it into the mold, so you're not removing a whole lot of excess. I see a lot of people using molds and putting way more fondant on it than they need, and either cutting off the excess after it's out of the mold or having to try to use, like I just did there, I removed the extra fondant off of there. It was just a little bit, but sometimes I see people cutting off a whole bunch. Two things that can happen with that is with a very delicate mold like this, it can warp and distort your finished product, and you can risk cutting your silicone mold. So try not to do that any more than you have to. And how I like to do that is by not putting too much fondant into the mold to begin with. You can add more fondant when you need to, but it's harder to remove excess. Anyway, tangent over. And then I'm just attaching it to the fondant with a little bit of, what did I use? You could use either piping glue or piping gel or some water. I honestly can't remember which one I used. I might have just used water. Either one would work, or some edible glue is fine too. And I'm just piecing all the pieces together and trying to merge them so it doesn't look like you pieced it together, if you know what I'm saying. And tuck those pieces around the Grinch or whatever image you use, kind of into your image so that it seems more seamless. And I'm just using luster dust and some silver luster dust and some Everclear mixed together to make a paint to paint onto the actual metal zipper part. I think that really makes it pop. And if your paint thickens up as you work with it, all you have to do is just add a little bit more of Everclear, or you can use vodka or lemon extract works well too. I'm using a smaller paintbrush so I don't end up putting too much paint on there. Now I put that in the refrigerator, and now we're making our spheres with some isomalt. I used a combination of the pre-colored isomelts, and I did end up making some more with the isomalt crystals because I ran out of the isomelts. So I just added some green to it and combined the two together. And this is a silicone sphere mold. Now be careful when you're doing this because this isomalt is hot. You have to be very careful. I know I should be using some heat-proof gloves, but I don't know. I'm a risk taker. I'm dangerous. But do as I say, not as I do. I have 2 of these sphere molds stacked into each other just to add a little bit more structure so that they don't warp when it's drying or cooling. And it also adds a little bit of protection to your hands, a little bit more thickness. And once these have cooled, gently remove them from your mold because they're not thick. You need to gently do it. And then I'm just using a heated pan to melt the very edges and stick them together, but leave half of your sphere in the mold when you do that, because with isomalt, the more you touch it, the more cloudy it can get. So try to prevent that a little bit by not touching it any more than you have to. You can wear gloves too, some just regular gloves. That will help with the fingerprints. And I did this to a bunch of them, but I'm only showing you these. But it was the same technique for all of them. And then to seal them, I like to use confectioner's glaze. It seals it and it adds a little bit of shine. I do like to use a creme brulee torch to remove air bubbles and to remove some of the cloudiness you get. But since these are so thin to begin with, if you try to use a blowtorch on these, you're going to melt right through them. So I just used the confectioner's glaze, and since I had touched them as little as possible, they were still shiny. So it worked out just fine. And I just set those in a, you can use an egg crate, or I like to use those bed mattress, these things here, that black thing, that's from a mattress pad that has never been used as a mattress pad. I just use it for a lot of uses, only with food. And I set them in the little crevices there to dry so that they didn't roll away on me. And all I'm doing is using a little of my extra isomalt to melt it again and using that as the glue. And you just saw real quick there, I used a smaller mold to make these smaller spheres. And those were solid. So they look a little darker because they're solid. And here I'm making the water ganache. And it's just candy melts mixed with water. I will put a link in the description box on the recipe there. And yes, you can do candy melts with water and make a water ganache very easily. I know it sounds counterproductive, but it actually works really well. And then I'm just piping it all the way around, and I'm trying to make sure my drips don't get too long around the image in particular. And you can remove the extra, like I just showed you on that one that went a little crazy. You got to get the temperature just right on those. So here's my Grinch Peekaboo zipper cake. I hope you liked it and got something from it that you can use. And I hope you give it a try. So we'll catch you on the next one.